Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to do my review of WCW SuperBrawl 1999. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Disco Inferno versus Booker T. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Inferno and Booker T, with Booker T keeping the pace of the match. And Booker T ultimately hits his signature Harlem Hangover off the top rope on Disco Inferno. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Booker T. Hats off to Booker T for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Chris Jericho versus Perry Saturn. I thought it was a decent match. Saturn looked absolutely ridiculous, by the way. Saturn then attacks Jericho. Saturn was keeping the pace of the match, but Jericho hits a lion salt on Saturn in the middle of the ring. Saturn then gets up, hits a Death Valley driver on the referee. Saturn then leaves the ring, and your winner of the match by countout is Chris Jericho. Hats off to Chris Jericho for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Billy Kidman versus Chavo Guerrero. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Kidman and Guerrero, with Guerrero keeping the pace of the match. But Billy Kidman hits his signature shooting star press off the top rope on Guerrero, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time still WCW Cruiserweight Champion, is Billy Kidman. Hats off to Billy Kidman for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a 2 out of 3 falls match for the WCW Tag Team Championships. It is Dean Malenko teaming up with Chris Benoit versus Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham. I thought this was a good matchup, back and forth matchup between both teams, with Malenko and Benoit keeping the pace of the match. Benoit then hits a diving headbutt off the top rope, but missed and hit Hennig. Dean then puts Windham into a clover leaf. Windham then taps out. Winner of the first fall is Dean and Benoit. Windham then gets up, chokes out Malenko, and your winner of the second fall was Hennig and Windham. And then later on, Windham and Hennig ended up getting the third fall. And your winners of the match, and at that time, new WCW Tag Team Champions, are Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham. Hats off to Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a hair versus mask match. It is Rey Mysterio teaming up with Conan versus the Outsiders. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Mysterio and Conan keeping the pace of the match. Hall then hits a fallaway slam on Mysterio. Nash then throws Mysterio like a rag doll around the ring. Conan then attacks Hall and Nash. Luger then attacks Conan. Referee was distracted. Mysterio then hits a springboard moonsault on Nash. Miss Elizabeth then distracts the referee. Hall then hits a razor's edge or an outsider's edge on Mysterio. Pins for the 3. And your winners of the match are the Outsiders. Hats off to the Outsiders for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Diamond Dallas Page versus Scott Steiner for the WCW Television Championship. I thought this was an okay matchup. DDP attacks Steiner. DDP was keeping the pace of the match. Bagwell makes his way out to the ring. DDP then attacks Steiner and Bagwell, but Steiner applies a submission on DDP. And your winner of the match, and at that time still WCW Television Champion, is Scott Steiner. Hats off to Scott Steiner for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Roddy Piper versus Scott Hall for the WCW United States Championship. Piper quickly attacks Hall. Piper was keeping the pace of the match. Piper then applies a sleeper hold on Hall, but Disco tries to attack Piper. Nash is here. Piper then attacks Nash. Hall then ultimately hits a roll-up on Piper. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW United States Champion, is Scott Hall. Hats off to Scott Hall for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Goldberg versus Bam Bam Bigelow. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Goldberg and Bigelow, with Goldberg keeping the pace of the match. Bigelow then hits a diving headbutt on Goldberg, but Goldberg gets up, hits a spear on Bigelow. Goldberg then ultimately hits a jackhammer on Bigelow as well, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Goldberg. Hats off to Goldberg for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW SuperBrawl 1999. It is Ric Flair versus Hollywood Hogan for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Hogan, with Hogan keeping the pace of the match. Hogan then hits Flair with a chair shot. Flair then gets up, applies a figure 4 leg lock on Hogan. NWO member comes out to the ring and stuns Flair. Hogan then capitalizes on this and pins Flair for 1, 2, 3. And then come to find out the NWO member that actually stunned Flair was actually Ric Flair's own son. It was David Flair. A couple of things I'm going to say about Super Brawl before I get out of here, man. Number one, this was a decent event. It really was. Super Brawl 1999 was a really good event with a lot of decent matches on the card, honestly. The mask versus hair match between Conan and Mysterio versus the Outsiders was a solid matchup. This was actually the first time that Rey Mysterio actually unmasked and actually wrestled in WCW for a little while without a mask. So I thought that was absolutely awesome. It was great to see the Outsiders back together, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. I know there was like a little, obviously two different stables within NWO. They had the NWO Black and White and NWO Wolfpack. So, obviously Hall was on the Black and White NWO with Hollywood Hogan. And, Kevin Nash had the Wolfpack with, teaming up with Lex Luger and Conan and Sting. So it was great to see the Outsiders back. Goldberg versus Bigelow, great matchup, good rivalry between both Goldberg and Bigelow. And obviously the main event, Ric Flair versus Hollywood Hogan. Again, two of the biggest superstars in professional wrestling going toe-to-toe in the middle of the ring. It always makes for a great main event, man. There's not, back in the day, I feel like there was not a time where people didn't be, they weren't disappointed with seeing a Ric Flair versus Hollywood Hogan main event. I mean, those guys always brought the match, always give the fans a great match. And to be honest with you, back in the day, I could have seen Flair and Hogan wrestle every single night. It probably wouldn't have disappointed me. Two absolute legends, two Hall of Famers, and it made for a great main event. But with that being said, just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW Super Brawl 1999 a solid rating of a 5 at best. But this is my review of WCW Super Brawl 1999. I hope you guys are out there staying safe, be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.